This week's Daf Chav Daled. Baruch Hashem, we're moving along. We're getting closer to the end. Hopefully, Be'ez Hashem will finish by Purim. We still have to see the blatter that we skipped, the Pirish on the Megillah. The Mishnah on the top of the Amid, the Mishnah says Yesoid, Ein Medalgim B'Torah, which means Kriyas HaTorah, you're laning. You can't skip around within the Torah from one place to another place. You can't skip. However, says the Mishnah, Medalgin b'Navi. Navi, when you're reading Navi, and when do you read Navi? The Haftorah. When you read the Haftorah, you could be Medalig. Clearly, the Mishnah, top of the Amid, Medalgin b'Navi, you're allowed to skip. However, even though you're allowed to skip, there are three Tnoim to the skipping. Three Tanoim, as we see down the Amid, the Mishnah and the Gemara. Tanai number one, when you skip, it has to be close by. When you skip, it has to be close by, which means even if you're skipping in Yirmiyah, you can't skip from Perek Aleph to Perek Lamed Dalet. That's too far of a skip. As Rashi explains that when you go so far, what is everybody going to do while you're being goylo from Perek Aleph to Perek Lamed Dalet? Everyone's going to wait and quiet. It's not a kavod tzibur for everybody to wait and be quiet. So Mamela, even though the Mishnah says clearly you're allowed to skip, you're not allowed to skip when there's too long of a skip. If it takes too long to get from A to B. It's brought la'alach and Scheiner Siman Kuf Mem Dalet Sif Aleph. The second Tanai, which is ready mevur in the Gemara says that you're only allowed to skip within the Sefer itself, which means you're in Yirmiyah, and we said you can't skip Tanai number one, you can't skip from Aleph to Lamed Dalet, but from Aleph to Bais or to Gimel, close by, you could skip. It's not, people don't, it takes a minute, less than a minute, it's okay. However, this skipping is only made within one sefer. From one sefer to the next sefer, that you can't do. Even if it means you'll skip from the end of Yirmiyah right to literally the next pasuk of the next sefer, even if it would be close by, you can't. And now Rashi explains, this is the Gemara, Rashi says, because sheyeshkan tiruf yosemidai, which I think it means people are going to get mixed up, confused, what's going on, you're taking out different other svarim. So Mamela, you can't skip, even though you could skip, and even if it's close, you need it to be close by, you can't skip misefer l'sefer.
We do that sometimes.
So Yankee, we're going to get clearly, this is really the point of today's shiur, to try to go through different cases, what we do, and see how it stems with these Tanoim, these three Tanoim. Very good. Where do we do it?
I remember the Parsha. I remember that we
move around.
No, we skipped the four psukim from a different sefer. Take out a second.
Very good. Shabbos Shuvah. We're going to get Shabbos Shuvah is actually very complex. We'll see. We'll get to it. But very good. Shabbos Shuvah is a good example. We skip. But let's first go through the Tanoim clearly, and then we'll go through, the cases to see how that is shtim with our Gemara, which we're learning over here, the Tanoim of skipping. So Tanai number one is when you skip, it has to be close by. Tanai number two is you can only skip within the Sefer. The Pri Chadash says, this is important, that even though we're saying you're not allowed to skip from Sefer to Sefer, that's only if it's two inyanim. It's based off what the Gemara itself says. It's b'shnei inyanim timachalak between Torah and Nevi'im. And for that, the Gemara says you're not allowed to go misefer l'sefer, which means dafka if it's two inyanim. If it's one inyan, you're even allowed to go from one sefer to another sefer. In the second Tanai, and this is where we're going to get to Shabbos Shuvah, we'll see this another Haftorah. In the second Tanai, that you're not allowed to skip from one sefer to another sefer, the Gemara tells us that Shrei Asar is considered one sefer, which means even though you're not allowed to skip from Yirmiyah to a different Shmuel, from one sefer to another sefer, within Shrei Aser, even though it's 12 small svarim, it's all considered one sefer, and you're allowed to skip around. Which we'll see, that's the teretz already for Shabbos Shuvah, but you're allowed to skip around within Shrei Aser.
When you're switching from Shrei Aser, it's even harder to find a place from one sefer to another and having a different sefer.
So what you're pointing out, you're saying it's taka hard, and as a Balkairi, you said you laned it, you taka right. I find it a little hard. Sometimes also, by the way, in Torah, you skip a little bit between aliyahs on a tainus. But we're not. I don't want to get off. We're focusing now on Haftorahs. I hear that's for the Balkaira to make sure, maybe to make a simon for himself before, to look which Amid it is, and go down, to find it exactly. But what we're concerned about is it's Tzibur not to have to wait. So the Balkaira should see.
But two svarim, you have it ready in place for your skipping.
So Lamais is like this, two svarim, we're getting a little clear about two svarim, but two svarim, really what Rashi says, it's tiraf adas. People get confused, you're switching from one sefer to the next sefer, even though you're right, you could have both prepared next to each other. It seems like Rashi says he's tiraf adas. So Trey Aser.
Didn't they all have Navi was one big sefer. It wasn't pshat then.
Like the way we do it like now?
We have a book.
No, so you're saying it used to be all in one big, just like a sefer Torah, everything was in one sefer?
In one actual.
We have it on the Gemara.
And Ksuvim maybe together with that. I'm not sure it was separate Nevi'im and Ksuvim, but it wasn't pshat yet.
Lamaisa, we'll get to that also. Even in that, so you're saying if it's one big sefer, maybe the.
So that's why the Gemara is also telling you the Treyasa is one big sefer. How do you know what's considered one big sefer? What's one sefer? What's not? We're telling you the Treyasa is considered one sefer.
Yeah.
No, meaning.
Lamaisa is like this. Really. It's not. I hear you're saying that from one sefer to another sefer, the tiruf. By the way, we'll see soon that even from one sefer to another sefer, how the poskim understand Rashi, the tiruf is because it takes time. So it's not so much because it's a physical separate sefer. Even if it's in one big sefer, it takes time going. Even though you're right, to go from the end of one sefer to the next sefer doesn't have to take time. But that's the din. You're right. Shrei Aser is also from one sefer to another sefer. However, Shrei Aser has a din like one sefer. Important Rashi in Babasa. Why is it like that? Why tak is Shrei Aser considered one sefer? Not so much why, but that it is considered one sefer. Rashi says in Babasa Daf Tezvav, V'shneim Aser metoich shehaya nevuos seim ktanois. It was short. It's small svarim. Lo yikosam anavim atzim ish sifrein. Each one was it. So they wrote all the Trei Aser. V'amdu v'kasvu nevuos seim of all the Trei Aser. V'tzarfu nevuos ktanois imam v'asam sefer gadol. They made it into one sefer. Why did they make it to one sefer? Because if it's very small, it might have gotten lost. You have a sefer that's so small, so maybe they combined all the Trei Aser into one. It's considered one sefer. So back to what we're saying, and that's why Tikkun Leil Shavuos that we say those the Arizal to say Shavuos night, it takes psukim from the Torah, from Nevi'im, from Ksuvim, from Mishnayos, go through Kol HaTorah Kula. From Nevi'im, from Ksuvim, it takes from Yirmiyah, from each of the Svarim, it takes some psukim. When it comes to Trei Aser, it doesn't go through all of the Trei Aser. It just takes a little bit from the beginning, from Hosea, and from the Malachi, from the end. Which is because it's one sefer, and Mamela we take some psukim. Any other sefer, we take from every single sefer of the Chav Daled Sifrei Kodesh. But when it comes to Trei Aser, we only take from the beginning to the end because it's considered one sefer. Now that we have clear the two Tanoim, what were the two Tanoim? Number one, it has to be close by. And number two, which we said, even if it's close by, you could only skip within the Sefer itself, not from one Sefer to the next. But we said, in the second Tanai, these are Yotzim and Aklal. Shrei Aser is considered one Sefer. Now let's go to two scenarios. I don't know of more. If anybody knows of more, let's try to go through that case as well. The Haftorah of Shabbos Shuvah and the Haftorah of Mafter Yoina on Yom Kippur. The Haftorah of Mafter Yoina, which is the Haftorah of Yoina, which is one of the Svarim in Trei Aser. So we read the whole story of Yoina, and then we end off with some psukim of Micha, which is really we're skipping from Sefer Yoina to Micha. So that's fine because it's close by. It's close by. And it's from one Sefer to another Sefer. The teretz is Treyos is considered one Sefer. That's very good. What's about Shabbos Shuvah? Shabbos Shuvah, we read the Haftorah Shuvah Yisrael, which is the Haftorah of Hosea, the first of the Treyasar. Then there are two other, call it Haftoras, two other parts that the Chumash brings. What else we read? It ends off, the Haftorah of Shuvah Yisrael ends off, Upoishim Yikashlubam. So we don't want to be Messiah B'Davara, so maybe we have something else. What are the other two Haftorahs that we have? One is Haftorah in Yoel. So Yoel is okay, Yoel is close by. But then Micha. Micha is further away. So first of all, about the Tanai of skipping Mesefer LaSefer, that was no problem because it's all Hoshea, Yoel, Micha, it's all in Treyasar. That's fine. So that we're not concerned about. You can read Shuvah Yisrael, then you can read Haftorah of Yoel, then you can go to Micha, Gavaldik, it's all one Sefer. But what's about reading after Hoshea? Yoel is close by, but Micha is far away. So Tanai number one is, even if you skip, you can't skip far away. So how could you skip far away over here? We spoke about this more by Arichas for the Haftorah of Shabbos Shuvah. I think I gave the Shiur here this year in the Kol Biker. But the punchline, Rav Moshe Feinstein has a tshuva. And he explains why is it that we have two separate Haftorahs, not to be Messiah B'Davar Ra, Upoishim Yikashlubam. Why can't we just have one of the Haftorahs, either Hashem Nasan Koilei, the one in Yoel, or the one in Micha? One is enough. Why do you have to have two? So Rav Moshe says like this: really, the one in Micha is much shorter. We would rather do the one in Micha. However, it's far away, so maybe we do the one in Yoel. However, if you're not reading from a klaf, say the poskim. This is an important exception which I left out before. I'll say it now. What were the two Tanoim we said? You can't skip far away, and you also can't skip Misefer LaSefer. I think it's the Pri Megadim, the Mishnah brings it, that if you don't read the Haftorah from a klaf, you read the Haftorah from a chumash, then you could skip even far away. Why? Because you have one Haftorah over here, you put a paper, a clip, a string, you stop over here, you give a turn over here, the tzibur is not waiting, so maybe you could skip. And not only could you skip from one sefer to another sefer, no problem. There's no tircha, the tzibur, no one's getting confused. It's just a turn. So Mela says Rav Moshe like this, for both Tanoim, in a chumash it's not applicable. Says Rav Moshe like this, the Haftorah of Shabbos Shuvah, it's a mistake. You don't have to read both. We'll get to a little later that some say you do read both. But Rav Moshe says the reason for both is only depending if you're reading from a klaf or you're reading from a chumash. If you're reading from a klaf, we have to stick close by. Samela, the Haftorah of Yoel is closer. However, the Haftorah of Yoel is a much longer Haftorah. So for klaf, you don't have a breira. You can't make the olam wait. But if you're reading from a chumash, so Micha, it's taka one say, but it's a long skip. So for some chumash, you go to Micha. That's how Moshe explains why we have two. So we explained so far the two Tanoim, what the two Tanoim are, and the exception, really before the exception, why in the two Tanoim, but even that it's a chumash, it's not applicable. Now let's get to the third Tanai. And this is really be'ikr what we have to handle. Tanai number one was that it has to be close by. Tanai number two is that you cannot skip Misefer LaSefer, and Shrei Aser is considered one Sefer. That's very clear. The third Tanai, The Gemara by us this week's Daf Chavdal, the third time the Gemara says is that you can't skip lemafreya, which means even if it's close by, you have Tanai number one, and even if it's in the same sefer, lemafreya you cannot skip. That's the words of the Gemara. Bavachli Yadalig Misayfa Sefer Litchilasai. Now, one would think Misayfa Sefer Litchilasai means you're only now allowed to go backwards if you're going from the end of the sefer to the beginning of the sefer. Rashi says Limafreya doesn't make a difference how much, even a little bit Limafreya you're not allowed to do. Tosfos in Yuma actually goes a little bit more by Riches. Tosfos in Yuma explains it. He says, from the end of the sefer to the beginning of the sefer, that you don't need a Gemara to tell us that you're not allowed to do. Why not? Because that's far away. That's already the first Tanai. Misayfa sefer l'tchilasa means even if it's very close by, literally, you want to go back one peirik, it's close by, you're not allowed to do it. That's Tanai number 3. Tanai number 3, you cannot go backwards. Even the same sefer, even if it's close by. What's the shaila? The shaila is the Haftorah of Parshas Mishpatim. By the way, the Haftorah of Parshas Mishpatim is a Haftorah that's not read often. Any regular year, when it's not an Ibiyar, not a leap year, Parshas Mishpatim is always Shkolim. So Mela the Haftorah is Shkolim. Even in a year, like a year, Shana Muberis, you have two others that Mishpatim is not Shkolim. Mishpatim can fall out to be Rosh Chodesh. And when it's Rosh Chodesh, you read a Shemayim Kissi. It could be Erev Rosh Chodesh, and it's Machar Chodesh. So it's only 4 times out of 19 years that we read the Haftorah this year of Parshas Mishpatim. Just to know when we get to it, we're not holding it. Now it's B'Shalach, Yisro, Mishpatim. It's 2 weeks around, but put it into the memory box. When we get there, this Haftorah, it's an interesting Haftorah, speaks about Yirmiyah is giving Musar, about being Mishaleach Ta'avadim. Anyways, this Haftorah of Parshas Mishpatim in Yirmiyah, where do we read in Yirmiyah? It's Yirmiyah Perek Lamed Daled, Pasuk Ches to Pasuk Chav Bais. However, after those psukim, we go back. Look, you can take a look. We go back to Perek Lamed Gimel. 2 psukim. We don't want to end Messiah and B'Davarah. The pasuk speaks about Serfua Be'eshet Teichacha. So Mamela, we go back to Perek Lamed Gimel. We go back. So the shaila is, how do you go back? Tonight, number Gimel in our Gemara Chav Daled is that you can't go back. You can't go back. So if you can't go back, how do you go back? In 2 weeks from now, Parshas Mishpatim, we're going to be reading the Haftorah in Yirmiyah, Perek Lamed Daled, and then we're going to go back to Perek Lamed Gimel. How do you go back? The teretz is, Al Pi the Kesef Mishnah. The Kesef Mishnah says a Gavaldagi Yesod, that the Gemara says you can't go backwards is only from one sefer to another sefer. Within the sefer itself, you're allowed to go backwards. Within the sefer itself, you're allowed to go backwards. Besides Trei Asar, which means the Gemara says Trei Asar is considered one sefer, and Memela you're allowed to skip from one sefer to the next sefer. For that, the Gemara says you're not allowed to go backwards. What meaning to say is, within a sefer, you're allowed to go backwards. Trei Asar, even though it's considered one sefer, Legabi going backwards, you're not allowed to go backwards. So Memela, what does the Kesef Mishnah say? Within one sefer, you're allowed to go backwards. So it's very geschmack. Parshas Mishpatim, that we go backwards from Perek Lamed Daled to Perek Lamed Gimel, because you're allowed to go backwards. It's in the same sefer. It's in Yirmiyah. You're allowed to go backwards. Very clear. The Rashash on the Tosfos in Yuma of Eimedalgal Mafreya, how he explains clearly Mefurish That means even a little bit, you're not allowed to go back. Here it's only a little bit. But Dr. Rashash, Bikan is a raya, not Bikan, from the Haftorah Mishpatim is a raya to the Kesef Mishnah. This that we're knowing in Mishpatim to go backwards is a raya to the Kesef Mishnah, that within one sefer you're allowed to go backwards. The problem is, the kasha is, Lamaisa we don't go with this Kesef Mishnah. The Magen Avram says it's not La Halacha. Zok Magen Avram, and even if you go with the Kesef Mishnah that you're allowed to go backwards in one sefer, that's only if it's one inyan. Here it's two inyanim. Obviously, that's why we skip away, because we want to go from a davar ra to something else. So Memela, Lefi la halacha the Magen Avram, we don't go with the Kesef Mishnah. You're not allowed to go backwards even in one sefer. So if you're not allowed to go backwards even in one sefer, how do we go backwards? How do we go backwards on Haftorah of Parshas Mishpatim? The Shari Ephraim Taka, that's the halachas on Kriyas HaTorah, he says you taka not. You should not be medalig, go back l'mafrei. You taka shouldn't. You taka should not. You should taka not be medalig l'mafrei. So what should you do? So Reb Chaim Kanevsky in his Sefer Taimi Dekra says the Rambam in the end of Ava goes through all the different Haftoras. There's a Sidri, goes through Haftoras, and the Rambam says that for this Haftorah you read Perek Lamed Dalet, and when you're done, not to be Messiah B'Dover Ra, you continue Perek Lamed Hey. That's what the Rambam says. So here you have an Eitzah not to go backwards. But Lamaisa, Reb Chaim Kanevsky, Shlita brings B'Shem his father, the Sleipler, and that was Taka the Minig in the shul. They didn't do it, which means that they did not go to Perek Lamed Hey. And Lamaisa, the Minig was to skip back. That's the Minig, and that was done, and that's what they do. But Al Kapanim, we're really ending all for the Kasha, then how could you go back? L'char, you can't go back. One thing is yes, Miyoshev, that this that was saying that you about Parshas Mishpatim going backwards, if by you in the shul they don't learn from a klaf, they learn from a chumash, to see Red Zeis himself from Chaim Kanevsky, just like we said earlier on the first two Tanoim. What were the first two Tanoim? You're not allowed to skip far away, and you're not allowed to skip from one sefer to another sefer. So he said, but in a chumash, you are allowed because it's not complicated. You just give one turn and you get there. So he says, if you lay Parshas Mishpatim, the Haftorah from a chumash, you're also good to go. Because even if it's backwards, it's very little, but even if it would be a lot, it's no big deal. You just give a turn back and it's fine. Just to conclude over here, first of all, in the Kesef Mishnah, that the Kesef Mishnah says that you're allowed to go backwards in one sefer. L'chayru, we have a raya from the 4 Haftoras that end with pranusa. I once gave you a shiur about it when we were learning brachas, that about being Messiah and B'davar Toiv. So Mela, the minig is being Messiah and B'davar Toiv. We go backwards. We go back Hashivenu in 4 different places. In Eicha, we don't want to be Kiyim Mois Mastanu. Then we go back to Hashivenu. It's not only one pasuk, but we go backwards. In Eicha, Yeshayad, Haftorah of Shabbos Rosh Chodesh, Hashemayim Kisi. We don't want to end with the last pasuk, which is Pranusa. We go back a pasuk. Koheles and Malachi also, the Haftorah of Malachi of Shabbos Agadol, we go back. L'chayru, this would be a raya to the Kesef Mishnah that within one sefer you're allowed to go back. L'mafreya. Just to conclude, the Kesef Mishnah says that you're allowed to go backwards in one sefer. However, Shrei Aser is not considered one sefer, Lagabe going backwards. It's considered one sefer, Lagabe skipping ahead, that you're allowed to go mi-sefer la-sefer, but backwards you're not allowed to go. From one sefer in Shrei Aser to another sefer. Let's go back now to the Haftorah of Shabbos Shuvah. The Haftorah of Shabbos Shuvah has, let's call it 3 Haftoras. The Haftorah of Hosea, that is the Haftorah Shuvi Yisrael. Then there's another 2 Haftoras. There's the Haftorah of Yoel, and then there's the Haftorah of Micha. There's another 2 Haftoras. So we said before for a Moshe that you only do 1. It just depends if it's in a Sefer or if it's in a Chumash. Some of the poskim say that either you do either or. Ramesh explains where it comes to either or, but you do either or. The Eliyah Rabbah says the minig is to do both. Not like what we saw from Ramesh. The Eliyah Rabbah says the minig is to read both. And I think that's our minig. We do both. However, Zokta Aderes, if you taka read both, make sure to read first the Haftorah of Yoel and then the Haftorah of Micha. In the Art Scroll Chumash, they taka have it in this order: first Yoel and then Micha. You look in other Chumashim, they actually have the order the other way. They bring even over here Yeshnam and Hagim Shainim, which way to read it. Yeshnam minhagim shayna from the psukim which you read. Ube'eza seder. The Eliyah Rabbah actually says, the Eliyah Rabbah says that you should read Micha first. But the big Dayesha asks on the Eliyah Rabbah, how could you read Micha shloika seder? In other words, what we're saying over here from the Kesef Mishnah, you could go backwards, but only within 1 sefer, and Treyas is not considered 1 sefer. So Meil and Shabbos Shuvah, if you're going to go with the minig to read all 3 Haftoras, you have to go Keseder of first Hosea, then Yoel, and then Micha, as opposed to Micha first. So just to sum up, on this week's daf, we learned very clearly that Medalgim Benavi, however these 3 Tanoim, even though you're allowed to be Medalig, you can't skip far away. You can't skip from 1 sefer to another sefer, and you can't skip limafreya. We saw there's a shaila where it's applicable. However, all 3 tanoim do not apply when you're laying from a chumash. If you're laying from a chumash, you could skip far away, you could skip from 1 sefer to another sefer, and you could skip limafreya. Have a wonderful Shabbos.
Yeah, but Shabbos, Shabbos not a Chodesh also.